Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you all are signing in from today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jonathan Jakischa with Tech Connect. Thank you for joining us for Commercial Space at the State Level, a conversation with the Texas Space Commission. We've got Norman Garza here on the line today. He is the be-all and end-all and expert of the Texas Space Commission, so we are very pleased to have him with us today. So we're going to take the next roughly 60 minutes or so to talk about the Texas Space Commission and the work they do with commercial space. So hopefully you are interested in that in some capacity. We're going to take a few minutes here in just a little bit for a brief presentation from Norman, followed up by a couple of conversational questions with him. And then we're going to get to the really important part, the questions from you all. So as we are talking today, be thinking about the questions that you have for Norman and the Texas Space Commission. I will say, try to keep your questions as broadly applicable as possible. Norman's not really going to be able to talk about specific grants or specific technologies, so keep that in mind as you are formulating your questions. We'll get to the Q&A in the second half of today's session. And if you have to drop for any reason, today's session is being recorded and will be posted on the NTA website shortly thereafter. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Norman Garza from the Texas Space Commission, the guy that you all joined here today to listen to. So Norman, please take us through your presentation.
Thanks, Jonathan, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as you said, to everybody, depending on where in the world you might be tuning in from. My name is Norman Garza. I get to serve as the first executive director of the newest state agency in Texas called the Texas Space Commission. And I encourage everybody first, if you're not familiar, to view our website, space.texas.gov, in case I run out of time at the end to put that out there. I think it's the coolest domain name of all state agencies currently here in the state. With that, I'll start to share my screen and walk everybody through a couple of slides to begin with, and then we can move into the Q&A. So thank you for having me for the conversation here about commercial space at the state level. The state of Texas certainly is trying its best to keep up with awareness about all of the different commercial space activities underway, and that's actually the opening segue to sort of the history that I'll share with y'all about why we were established. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to kind of go in hop around order here of the most recent years. The agency was established in 2024 only because that's when the appointments were made. I'll talk about those appointments for our governing body and our advisory consortium. However, the grant program and the legislation was actually passed in 2023. There was updated statutes in 2025. Right now, we're in the interim between those legislative sessions, so certainly activities underway that I'll share about now and things that we're anticipating potentially being on the radar for 2027 when our legislature reconvenes in January. And then lastly, I'd like to always, if we have time, talk about some of the regional positioning that different parts of the state are underway right now, in addition to the Q&A as well. That being said, I always make sure that we hone in on the statute of why we exist and how we're able to do what we're doing. And this is a snippet. The Texas Government Code defines the purpose of the Texas Space Commission to position the state as the global leader in civil, commercial, and military space activities. Those three silos, if you will, are very deliberate in terms of why the legislature included the purpose for this new agency, and I'll get into that in my comments. So here, this slide, I know it seems a little jumbled. I actually stole it from our counterpart called the Economic Development and Tourism Division within the Office of the Governor. And this is one of the report outs that their annual updates provide. You'll notice a lot of aviation related under the aerospace umbrella, bifurcated between aviation rather and space specific. So you'll notice an array of different companies that are located throughout the Lone Star State. And this is certainly something that we're proud of and certainly something that we're trying to build upon. And a lot of the space side under the aerospace umbrella, thankfully, is due to the momentum of the legacy of NASA's Johnson Space Center in the Houston area. So there was a need for coordination. I like to remind everybody that in the time frame of 2020 to 2022, there was not quite yet a term known as a household word like it is today, which was Artemis. However, of course, with the recent successful mission, the whole world is familiar with that program. But around that time, there were some state legislators and the governor here in Texas that started asking questions about what that means for the Lone Star State to participate in this major NASA program. And some of those conversations included discussions with the lady sitting at this table in the photo on the far right, and her name is Vanessa Weish, the center director of Johnson Space Center. And the question came from the gentleman on the far left, a state representative, Dr. Greg Bonin, a neurosurgeon who might have been an astronaut otherwise, but serves as the chairman of the Texas House Appropriations Committee, asking what are potential risks for the state of Texas to participate in this Artemis program. And she quickly gave him some examples, and that was able to expand into conversation with some industry representatives, and those are the folks who are standing up behind the table, behind Governor Abbott here in this photo. And they were identified because there was a running joke back in that time frame in advance of the 2023 legislative session when the bill was passed to create the commission. And that running joke was, who's the one person that can write the one-pager about all things commercial space underway today in Texas? Quickly, it was realized that it certainly will require more than one person to help organize that conversation, and it's going to take up more than just one piece of paper. So that's how the concept evolved into organizing a commission, appointing a board, and then having an advisory consortium along the way to help move that conversation forward. So in 2023, House Bill 3447 did a couple of things. It created the Texas Space Commission. It established the Texas Aerospace Research and Space Consortium, or TARSEC as an acronym. And then a separate piece of legislation, the General Appropriations Act, House Bill 1, it included a combined effort of $350 million towards space activities. The $200 million was directly appropriated to Texas A&M University to construct a research RDT&E facility at Exploration Park outside of Johnson Space Center's gates in Houston. And the balance of $150 million was put into a grant program known as the Space Exploration and Aeronautics Research Fund, or SURF Trust specifically. And it's important to note that that appropriations was defined as a fund held outside of the state treasury, which allows the state comptroller's office to actually invest the corpus of it along the way as we are reimbursing grantees. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So you're seeing in these images at the top, Dr. Nancy Curry-Gregg. She's a board member appointed by the Texas House Speaker's Office to the Space Commission Board of Directors. And then you've got an image of a company that has received a grant from us, and which is Interlin, and you're probably familiar with what their technologies are trying to enable on the surface of the moon, which is certainly apropos with the recent moon base announcements coming from the NASA administrator and others. So I've mentioned to you that we have a 9-person board of directors. 3 are appointed by the governor, 3 appointed by the lieutenant governor, 3 appointed by the House Speaker. You might be familiar with some of these names. I've already called out Dr. Curry-Gregg. Our chair, Ms. Gwen Griffin, her experience as a communicator, owning her own firm that has represented everything from nonprofit organizations, STEM organizations, to the big prime organizations that are all related to the space exploration and space flight missions. Kathy Leaders, Kirk Shireman, Sassy Duggleby, Evan Loomis actually brings to the table venture capital experience, Brad Morrison, private equity, as well as cybersecurity, and of course, Dr. Heather Wilson, former Secretary of the Air Force. She was the SecAF under the first Trump administration when the Space Force was created. On the left here, you're just seeing the structure of how the legislation said that this commission should be organized. Like I mentioned, the board of directors, then per statute, the board has to hire a chief compliance officer, general counsel, and executive director. Then we have the TARSEC Executive Committee as an advisory consortium. They are a non-governing body. They have no direct decision-making authority for the use of the SURF Trust for grants. Then we've got our staff, and we are administratively attached to the office of the governor, and our primary duty is to administer the SURF Trust through grants. And then the non-governing body of TARSEC, in this case, 2 are appointed by the governor, 2 appointed by the lieutenant governor, 2 appointed by the House Speaker, and then a designee from the University of Texas System Chancellor's Office, the Texas A&M System Chancellor's Office, and the Rice University President's Office. In addition to these 9 appointees, the statute also designates that every campus of higher education in Texas is eligible to designate a local liaison, and then this executive committee can also invite others who are outside of the academic world to become a member of TARSEC as well. Their website is tarsec.space, and I'm proud to share that the Texas Space Commission staff has helped revamp that website as I think recently of yesterday or the day before when it went live. So tarsec.space, in addition to the Texas Space Commission website, should be a takeaway for you. So let's talk about the grant program specifically. Everybody's curious about what programs or what projects can be proposed. These 5 buckets are actually statutorily defined. So if you'll follow me in your mind's eye, I like to describe this by drawing a box. The baseline of the box, or the bottom line, is the minimum eligible requirement or a threshold that an interested entity must meet in order to submit a proposal. And that minimum threshold is that you have to have an existing presence in Texas. That doesn't mean you have to be headquartered in Texas. It means you have to have an existing presence. Eventually, you actually have to demonstrate that you've registered with the Comptroller's Office, the Texas Secretary of State's office, et cetera. But at the beginning, for you to consider potentially submitting a proposal whenever that window is next open, and I'll talk about that timeline next, is that you have to have some kind of an existing presence. I mentioned to you up front in that image with all of the company logos that the Governor's Office of Economic Development and Tourism is a counterpart to us. They're agnostic of the industry sector, but it's their role to help get more companies to move to Texas, whether it's oil and gas, healthcare, or space. But the Surf Trust specifically was designed to encourage and assist those existing companies in Texas to remain here, rather than being recruited to another state or another country. And along the way, if what we're able to help is expand their existing footprint, that's great. And even furthermore, if what we're able to do as a byproduct, a forcing function, if you will, to get attention from folks who aren't yet here in Texas to decide on their own to come and set up shop as an eligible entity for the minimum threshold required, then that's an even plus, if you will, plus along the way here. So I mentioned the $150 million that was appropriated in 2023. That $150 has been fully committed because as you continue to draw that box in your mind's eye, the left and right are statutorily defined project types, which must be related to space flight or space exploration. So things that can help get there or things that can be done there have to meet then these 5 boxes that are on the screen, which if you continue to draw the box in your mind, they're actually, the top line is 5 dashes. And those 5 dashes are what you see here on the screen. The project has to be related to space flight or space exploration, pertaining to emerging technology, pertaining to research and development, pertaining to workforce training, pertaining to post-mission curation, think things that come back that need to be analyzed in a lab, or think things that are infrastructure related to support the spaceports in Texas. That being said, in order to fully commit that $150 million, we had a grant program open for 4 months between September 24 and January 25, in which case we received 280 applications that combined had a funding request of approximately $3.4 billion, and we only had $150 million to work through. We did that in real time during the 2025 legislative session, which is why we were able to receive an additional $300 million in appropriations to the Surf Trust from the legislature in 2025. 0 of that 300 has been committed to date, but the board will likely be having a meeting soon. They have to discuss in an open session how they would like to prioritize the potential round of topics or calls for proposals to go after those, or to allocate rather, those new dollars. So I've already told you what the numbers looked like, but here's a breakdown of the kinds of entities that submitted proposals to us during that 4-month period previously. And these categories are the eligible entities that could submit. So inside that box, I like to describe to everybody that the people or the projects or the entities rather that can propose a project per statute include nonprofit organizations, businesses or companies that are either privately held or publicly traded, governmental entities, think municipalities, county governments, councils of government, as well as institutions of higher education, both public and private. So this is a breakdown of those requests that we received. We've awarded 24 grants to fully commit that $150 million. And this is available on our website, space.texas.gov, to see the list of those organizations or companies, the up to amount that was approved, where they're located in Texas, and then we've got some additional material to support the use or purpose, whether it's capital construction, whether it's equipment, whether it's research, et cetera, for what all of those funding levels are able to support. This is just a quick snapshot of a couple of examples of those awards, things that include microgravity research on an orbital vehicle, such as Intuitive Machines, Zephyr, the Concho Valley Council of Governments out in West Texas to conduct a feasibility study to decide how they might best position their local region of the state for launch or return and reentry. Commercial Space Station with Starlab. The Borderplex Alliance is an economic development organization out in El Paso. This was the highest amount awarded so far, of approximately $19 million, to assist with establishing SCIF capability that companies and organizations in Texas, particularly out in that far west Texas region, can have certain conversations with the Space Force specifically, as other SCIFs across the state, of course, are oversubscribed from other branches of the military. And then the Aldrin Family Foundation is another example for some STEM education programs that was approved by the board as well. I'm happy to pause here. I've got a couple of more slides that perhaps can be addressed through our conversation, Jonathan. So if you're comfortable with that, I'm prepared to pause these slides and have that conversation.
Absolutely. And I will say we've got a number of great questions coming in for the Q&A. So please, attendees, keep them coming. As many questions as you have that you would like to ask Norman Garza from the Texas Space Commission, please keep submitting them while he and I are talking. In the meantime, I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask. So you showed the 5 buckets that a proposed technology or mission needs to kind of fit within. Within that, are there red line use cases that the Texas Space Commission just simply cannot engage with? For instance, if somebody said that they wanted cannabis grown in space, is that something that would be a red line thing for you guys?
Not necessarily, and I have a 2-part answer for your question.
Okay.
The first is when I described that box and I told you about all of the eligible entities that are able to submit a proposal, there was one that was left out if you were listening and thinking creatively of the different kinds of folks that might propose. And that one is the federal government. We cannot give funds to the federal government directly. Otherwise,
Okay.
as long as your proposal, whether it's food in space, manufacturing in space, et cetera, can be described in the proposal from the applicant to align with those statutorily defined purposes, then here's the second part to my answer. We have a 9-person board of directors. They are the evaluators of the proposals, and they all have different opinions about whether a certain project actually is timely for moving the ball now. So something like cannabis in space, while you might be able to write your proposal to align with something such as the research and development box that I showed, and it being an in-space activity, et cetera, it doesn't mean that the board has to fully contemplate funding it if it's not collectively decided as a real-time needed action. So I'll pause break real quick from my answer and give an addendum or an annex, if you will, here. What we have observed from folks that are interested in proposing during the next round, whenever that's opened, which is a TBD, just up front, if you're waiting now to hear when I will say when the application period is open, I will make the reminder that that has to be decided in an open meeting. So I can't offer any peek behind the curtains to anybody that's viewing right now about when that might be. I fully expect it to be before the end of this calendar year, but that's the best I can offer at the moment. That being said, the proposals that have come in or those that are being discussed as potential future submissions, what's important for folks to understand is that while you might have a grand idea that falls within the statutorily defined purposes, and you come up with a rough order of magnitude on the cost or the estimate for making that a successful project come to fruition, what hasn't been contemplated, I think, enough is the phasing out of that project. Say you come up with a grand idea and you understand that you need X amount of time and X amount of dollars. If you don't actually help to define what that breakdown is, it doesn't help the evaluators in their decision point of, does it really need to be funded now? And does it really need to be fully funded with whatever that ROM was that you came up with? Say I have an idea for $10 million and I say, I think it'll take me 3 years to do it. Please and thank you. I'll let you know how it goes. That doesn't quite fit, and I'm sure everybody here on the viewership are familiar with going through that process. So really then questions come back like, well, can they really spend $10 million in 3 years? Do they only need $500,000 for the first 3 months? Like, what is that actual breakdown? And sometimes the proposals or those who are interested in submitting a proposal doesn't have that granularity. So anyhow, long answer to your first question. I apologize.
That's a great extended answer, and I do appreciate it. And actually, I want to tug a little bit on one of those threads there. So when it comes to proposing to the Texas Space Commission, you, I'm guessing, would encourage applicants to give some serious thought to not only what is the total funding, but also the realistic timeline for how that funding gets spent and on what it gets spent. Yeah, that being able to present that narrative to the evaluators goes a long way to hopefully convincing the evaluators that this is a worthwhile applicant. Yes?
I'd say that's entirely accurate, yes.
Okay, all right. When it comes to the grant money, are there constraints on how that money gets spent? Does it have to be for R&D? Can it be put aside for hiring, for capital expenditures? Anything like that?
Sure, good question. So on our website, space.texas.gov, you can actually go and see what a model template grant agreement looks like. We put that out there and it's still there so that folks can understand something as granular as what you're asking now. What are eligible costs? What are ineligible costs? What is the potential indirect cost rate as well? All of those breakdowns are included in that template for folks to review. It's possible that that gets updated. A lot of it is just standard legalese that any state agency in Texas, regardless of whether we would be the Cosmetology Board or the Space Commission administering grants, has to follow because it's applicable to all state agencies. But there are a couple of more specific use cases or defined purposes for the funds that are in statute, and we outline those as well. But yes, overarching, it can be used for salary, it can be used for capital construction, it can be used for equipment procurement, all following, of course, the right processes and documentation. I will share that what we've observed with some of those 24 awardees thus far is that many have never done business at the state level. Most are familiar with doing business at the federal level in terms of receiving a grant or a loan from the federal government. But just because you're familiar with how they do things doesn't mean that that's exactly apples to apples for the state. We do require additional auditable material to be submitted. Things like hourly time metrics or time cards and that granularity if you're wanting to apply some of it towards the salary, and not in bulk. And that's because those are rules established by either the Texas Comptroller's Office for every state agency to follow, or the Texas State Auditor's Office for every agency to follow. And so a lot of times at the beginning, people were like, well, thank you for this, appreciate it. But we never had to do all of this level of reporting for some of our federal contracts. This is not a contract, this is a grant. And the grant model is a reimbursement process. And we outlined that in the grant agreement template on our website as well. It requires the awardee to spend their own funds first, and then they have to submit to us, either on a monthly or quarterly basis, an auditable report that demonstrates all of the use cases or cost objects that they spent money on. And this is where really we're able, with our compliance team, to ensure that what they spent money on are eligible costs or expenses, to your point, whether it can be used for personnel, for capital construction, for research, et cetera. It has to fit within those buckets. And we have a pretty robust reporting form that you might imagine that is intended to meet muster when the state auditor's office is likely going to review all of these 24 grant agreements and how those funds were pushed out at the end of the day.
Great. Attendees have not been slacking. There are a ton of questions. We will get to them momentarily. I'm going to do maybe one or two more questions for Norman, and then we're going to get to your questions. So apart from grant making, are there other ways that the Texas Space Commission can assist a commercial space company that operates in Texas? Networking opportunities, webinar participation, conferences, letters of support, anything like that?
Good question. I'll go in reverse order. As a state agency, we cannot offer letters of support, as an example, to anybody, for example, their own proposals to other funding sources. In addition to the grant itself, we are also able, per law, to organize the matching, a matching requirement that perhaps you're going after a private sector fund or even a federal fund. We could potentially leverage our Serve Trust for that kind of opportunity. Networking and dot connecting, absolutely. But any services or regulatory activity specifically is not part of the Texas Space Commission's current duties as defined in statute. So in addition to the board and the commission staff that I've referenced, I've also brought up the TARSEC Executive Committee. Last year, I think they held 4 or 5, I can't remember, workshops around the state. And I know that they're already planning a few for the balance of this calendar year as well. So that is another example of how parts of the Texas Space Commission can be a further assistance beyond just administering a grant.
Okay, great. The last question that I'm going to ask, you've talked about the next round in general terms, because right now that's all that you can say. For attendees that are interested in potentially applying for that next round of grants, is there a mechanism by which they can essentially raise their hand and say, yes, we want to be notified when the next round is open? Is that an option on a Texas Space Commission website?
So the best way to accomplish that is to sign up for our digital newsletter, as well as our digital email notifications that go out. For example, that's the first place that we'll post and share externally, besides just adding it to our website, when the next board meeting will be. So you can go there and self-register, and that's the best source of information to have that timely access to when the next round will be open, what the call for proposals might specify, et cetera, et cetera. So space.texas.gov and sign up for our distribution list.
All right, attendees, if you're interested in applying for the next round of Texas Space Commission grants, you have your marching orders, go check it out. I want Norm to be able to reach out later in the week saying, hey, we saw a huge spike of registrants interested in the next round of grants, so get to it. All right, so folks, as promised, we're going to get to your questions. I've got a ton of questions. I'm going to get to as many of them as I can. There are a number of them that cover the similar topics, so I'm going to consolidate those that I can to get to as many questions as possible. So is there any set aside within the Texas Space Commission grants for small businesses as opposed to large industry players? Is there anything like that?
To date, that's not been a decision point by the board, and it's not required in law. That's not to say that they might not contemplate that at a future board meeting and decide to do something like a set aside. But at the moment, no.
Okay. All right. Let me see what else we've got here. As I said, you have not let me down, folks. There is a ton of questions here, so just give me a minute while I scroll through what you've got. Here we go. Can you define what presence in Texas means from a legal status? Is having a single employee in the state enough?
So the law doesn't actually define that. It just expresses that it must be an intention met in the application process, and then it's up to the interpretation of the board. At the end of the day, a presence in Texas might be an employee. It might be a rented office space. It might be a partnership with another major organization, whether it's a university or a company in Texas. But in order, I say that as an answer to help people understand that the presence of Texas requirement in statute is interpreted by the board as per whatever information is submitted within the application from an entity. So it's incumbent upon a potential proposer to really outline what they are able to demonstrate is their existing presence in Texas, A. B, I'll expand it by saying, if you're able to demonstrate that in your narrative and the board wants to consider your proposal for an award, at the end of the day, if you're not able to provide a comptroller registration number, we call it a TINS number, all of this is explained on our website as well, then we won't actually be able to disperse those dollars to you. So at some point, whether you just have one employee but you don't have all of these other things in place, then we won't be able to actually administer that potentially approved grant. When the board considers an application in an open meeting, it's a conditional approval of an award for the proposer to still meet all of these other additional compliance requirements in order for funds to actually be distributed. And if the applicant who received a thumbs up from the board during an open meeting cannot meet all of those additional compliance requirements, then ultimately we go back to the board and say, I know you said this was a good idea, but they actually can't receive the funds because they haven't done all of these other things. So it's another two-part answer to your question, but it could be as simple as, I've got, an employee that's co-embedded with some other company or organization in Texas. I've got, my personal home is here, but I work for a company that's out of state. But that out-of-state company, wherever we're actually going, whoever's the signature on that grant agreement has to still meet all of these additional compliance requirements. Otherwise, we won't actually be able to administer the funding.
So number one, it sounds like from a Texas Space Commission perspective, you all are open to different mechanisms and narratives for meeting that presence in Texas requirement. And number two, the application and announcement of an award is the beginning of a relationship with the Texas Space Commission rather than a, here's your check, go do your thing. Yeah?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
It's a conditional award. Yeah.
All right, great. There were a number of questions along the lines of what does presence in Texas mean, so hopefully we have addressed that. The next question goes to the application process. So can you talk a bit about the criteria used for evaluating applications after all of the eligibility requirements are met?
Great question. So I can a little bit, and I'll point to an FAQ document that we've worked on and tried to keep updated that's available on our website. And one of the questions on that FAQ is along the lines of the evaluation criteria. It doesn't fully disclose exactly the matrix or the metrics by which the evaluators, our board, uses. For example, it doesn't say which things are weighted heavier in their evaluation process than others, but it does describe the kinds of I'll use the word requirement for the evaluation, but that it's not it's subjective, I guess, at the end of the day. But we do our best to outline that in the FAQ document. So I encourage everybody, if you haven't already read it, please go download it and keep it handy. There potentially could be some changes based off of whatever decisions are made during an upcoming open meeting by the board that outlines the next round of application requirements. But it currently speaks to how things were done for administering that initial $150 million.
One of the questions we got was along the lines of that first round of grants. What sort of lessons did you all learn from that first round of grants? Were you able to, or do you envision making any changes to this new round based on how that first round went?
Sure. So I think that was a two-part question. I'll have a multi-part answer. The first is what we were able to observe is the initial or the organic legislation, the first body of law that was written. It had a wide aperture for how the board could seek applications. In 2025, there was what we call a cleanup bill or an update to that initial body of law that kind of helps to narrow the aperture by which the board can make calls for proposal, because to your other point of the question, what did we observe or lessons learned, many entities submitted more than one application. And in particular, that came from institutions of higher education. And so there wasn't even a process by which the board required, for example, one university to self-select within their teams of researchers how to really put their most important or most supported internally proposal forward for consideration. And so that was one thing that we observed, that out of that 280 applications, they were from 140 unique entities. So many of them, as I mentioned, submitted multiple applications. And they were able to fit within one or several of those 5 categories that I described. And so that part of the law didn't change, but what did change rather, was a new requirement for the board to be more prescriptive, if you will, in their approach to seek proposals. So it's possible that they're only interested in, contemplating a call for proposals that is just 1 or 2, or in different a different series of sequential process to say, right now we want just things that are R&D related. Right now we just want things that are workforce related. Right now we just want things that might be more infrastructure related. So out of those 5 boxes, the new statute on the books after 2025, it tells the board to be more deliberate in the kinds of proposals that they want to receive from those 5 categories described.
Okay. Norm, this entire conversation, I have not heard you say the words minimum technology readiness level. So I'm guessing that when it comes to minimum TRL, Texas Space Commission doesn't really have one. That what you're looking for is interesting, promising technology that can be developed or deployed within the state, that it's not a minimum threshold, and that it comes down to the applicant providing a compelling narrative for why their technology is worth of funding.
I will say all of that is correct. I agree with, and I'll make a comma and say, right now, what is it that your proposal can do sooner rather than later? How is it aligned beyond just your single use or your single area of interest based off of your expertise or your business model? How does it really help the greater ecosystem in Texas rather than just one university lab or one cog in a manufacturing line? How does it really have a wider net positive, if you will, to the burgeoning commercial space economy across the state of Texas? And what other partners do you plan to include? Those are examples of some of the awardees that have been approved to date have demonstrated. So I would encourage everybody to do what you said, plus the comma that I've added, of making sure that your potential project is not just a selfishly organized concept, if that makes sense.
I got another thread here. You talked about partners. We've got a question here asking whether or not company contribution or investment partners help to increase the chance of success, broadly speaking, when it comes to an application. So if company A says, we've already secured X number of thousands of dollars from this investment partner, we're looking for a matching grant from the Texas Space Commission, does the promise of partnership or outside funding, does that raise the profile of an applicant?
I don't know that it would raise the profile, but I have to believe that some of our folks on the board who are evaluating would appreciate that information along the way. We don't, for example, require letters of support, but of course those are useful additive resources. We don't require that a proposal already has those other funding mechanisms. However, if you're able to demonstrate, to your point, stacking our capital in addition to others, I do believe that that would be of interest to some of the evaluators on our board, specifically those that come from the VCPE world, appreciating that leverage of one color of cash alongside another color of cash.
Okay. We've got a number of questions along this line, so I want to make sure that we do address it a little more concretely here. You have said that an organization can partner with a Texas organization to apply for a grant. So if, for instance, company in Michigan partners with a company in Texas, that joint effort would then be eligible for consideration for a Texas Space Commission grant. Yes?
Yes. However, we would not be able to enter into an agreement directly with that company from Michigan. That would be a sub-recipient or sub-awardee relationship between the Texas entity specifically that would be an eligible recipient of funds from the Texas Space Commission.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So, company in Michigan, company in Texas, from a Texas Space Commission compliance perspective, the application should come from the company in Texas to make sure that it gets through that process. Okay, all right.
Not should, must.
Thank you, thank you. All right, so attendees, hopefully that clarifies things a bit for you there as well. All right, let's see. We've got just a couple more minutes here. I want to make sure that we get to as many different questions as we can. We've got a question asking about slides of the recording. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on the National Technology Alliance website shortly thereafter. Today is, inexplicably, today is Wednesday. It will probably be posted, I would guess, if not by the end of the week, then early next.
Jonathan, there was one question that we haven't gotten to yet that was part of the pre-read, which was, are previous grant winners eligible for future grants?
Yeah, please,
so
go for it.
Yeah, I'll touch on that since I haven't mentioned it yet. The answer is yes, potentially. There's just because you received one once, it doesn't mean you can't receive another one, but of course it depends on what the call is from the board, how they evaluate it, and whether it's something that ultimately they believe is another element for driving the ball forward. It doesn't necessarily need to be related to the previous project. It could potentially be a totally different project from the same awardee at the end of the day. But we have notified everybody that was part of that pool of 280 applications for the original 150 that application is no longer going to be considered. If they would like to resubmit whenever the window is open again, based off of whatever conditions are set by the board, then they're welcome to. But that previously submitted application, for all intents and purposes, is no longer eligible for consideration, or alive, if you will.
Okay. We're going to start to wrap up here shortly, so I want to kind of take care of a couple last minute things here. Number one, I've seen a number of questions coming in about when the next window for grants is going to be. We've talked about this. Basically, where things stand right now is Texas Space Commission is not able to specify when that next round of grants will open. Norm has said that he anticipates it prior to the end of the year, but he can't promise that it's going to be the case. Anybody that is interested in being notified when that next round of grants is open, go to the Texas Space Commission website page, and you can register to receive their email notifications and newsletters, and that will keep you informed about when that next round of grants is open for consideration. Norman, anything you want to add there?
Just a reminder of the website, space.texas.gov. Thanks so much for your time and having me today.
All right, folks. Thank you very much for your time today. I really do appreciate you signing in today. I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of your questions. You guys listened. I asked for lots of questions and you absolutely did. I really do appreciate you signing in today and taking time to talk to us, Norman and myself, about the Texas Space Commission and the work that they are doing to support commercial space in Texas, and quite frankly, because of partnership opportunities beyond Texas. That's great. And folks, hopefully this was an informative session for you, and you'll sign up for the next NTA webinar on commercial space. I would like to thank Norman Garza from the Texas Space Commission for taking time out of his day to talk with you all. We've been talking about this webinar for several weeks now, and I've learned quite a bit just in today's session. So Norman, thank you very much for that. Before we sign off, Norman, any last words that you would like to leave our attendees with?
Don't hesitate to reach out. We'll do our best. So we've got a communications form on our website as well. If you want to request a speaker, if you want to request a meeting, if you want to request a connection to another state agency, et cetera, please use that online portal, and we will process them as quickly as possible.
All right, fantastic. Attendees, thank you one last time for signing in today. Hopefully this was an informative session for you. Hopefully you are now more well-versed in what the Texas Space Commission can do for companies operating in the commercial space sector, and hopefully you are beginning to plot out what your application will be and how you're going to proceed. I would love for Norman to come back to us later on and say, hey, we saw even more submissions coming out of this webinar that we participated in. So thank you all very much for being here today. Check out the recording for this session for anything that you would like to revisit. It'll be up on the NTA website very soon. So thank you all once again. Have a great rest of your day, and see you again next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.